This is your Chapter 1, Sections 1 and 2 presentation. The two essential questions you're attempting to answer by the time we finish this video, and you'll do it on your comprehension check, which you can find on Google Classroom, are what are the origins of the American government? And 2, how did European thought provide the theoretical foundations of American government? So you may want to jot those down, pause it here, take notes as we go so that when you go into the comprehension check, you have the information that you need in order to answer those two questions. One of the first colonies, not the very, very first, there were a couple fledgling and failed colonies early on, but one of the first colonies was the colony in Virginia, and it was chartered by the London Company in April of 1606. The horrible conditions and a lack of strong leadership led to a colony that was very much struggling, but that leadership improved with the colony's third president, Captain John Smith. Despite that improvement, eventually they faced what was known as the starving time. And a lot of the successes that Smith had had before, trading with native tribes, mandating work, ultimately failed because of that tough time that led some, in fact, to the desperate measures of cannibalism. Conditions eventually improve in the Virginia colonies, however, when tobacco comes around and becomes a cash crop. But at this point, their existence in the United States was dependent upon a corporation in the London Company and granted by the British government. The earliest inhabitants in America, that is, those who came before the colonists, the indigenous people of North America, had been there for more than 30,000 years. Some estimates suggest their route to the continent is pretty debated. Some believe that they island hopped across the Pacific, while others believe that they passed into the United States from Alaska, across the ice from Russia. But regardless, and most likely there's some combination of those things. Regardless, the fact is that the cultures, regardless how they got here, varied widely, as did their political systems. Some estimates suggest that there were as many as 100 million indigenous people living in what is now the U.S. prior to the arrival of the disease-carrying colonists. That number quickly was decimated due to disease, geographical displacement, in other words, being moved, and warfare. With regards to the first colonists, the first people to come, in addition to the religious refugees that we'll talk about a little bit later, were people who came here for commercial reasons. They were drawn here for the opportunity to make large sums of money. And that includes both the workers and the businessmen who were running the companies who were basically employing those workers. The initial English settlement, in addition to the English settlement at Jamestown, the Dutch New Netherlands, what is now known as New York, the Dutch New Netherlands Company, settled along the Hudson and lower Delaware rivers. It became known as New Netherlands. When its charter wasn't renewed by the Dutch West India the Dutch West India Company quickly established trading posts on the Hudson River, first in Orange, what is now known as Albany, and New Amsterdam, which is New York City or Manhattan Island. They were both occupied by salaried employees of the Dutch West India Company. In addition to the Dutch, they also employed and people settled from places like Finland, Germany, Sweden, and even some free blacks. What this leads to is the beginning of a New York culture that persists to this day of cultural inclusivity. As religious traditions take root in Europe with the Reformation, A lot of these new Protestant sects face a great deal of persecution. Um, this is also the period during which Enlightenment philosophers and scientists challenge the rigidity of European scientific, cultural, and political norms. The combination of these intellectual and religious develops encourage people to seek alternatives to the kings and queens that they had lived under for so long, and the divine right of kings, in other words, the religious justification of kings ruling, as well as the role of the church in the role in their lives. The Puritans, a Protestant group, was persecuted by the monarchy in England. The Church of England was the official church of the monarchy, and so they sought more religious freedom in the New World. In 1620, the Pilgrims land in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Um, they believed that they would create, they believed they were destined, that they were going to create a city on the hill and become an example of righteousness. But remember, of course, their form of righteousness. And they enforced a strict code of authority and obedience. They quickly, however, because of how strict that code was, faced challenges to their strict puritanical views. Roger Williams was one of the first. He arrived in 1631, and he suggested that the Puritans went too far when they punished settlers who deviated from the strict code of morality, and argued that it was God, not the people, who should punish moral dalliances. He was banished, left, and then he is one of the original settlers of Providence, Rhode Island. Another Rhode Island settler, another banished uh, person banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for her divergent political views, was Annie Hutchinson, who believed that churches had lost touch with the Holy Spirit. She had a lot of female followers, had progressive views on religious tolerance and equality for women, and that got her banished, as we said. So she established Portsmouth, Rhode Island. In other places, however, there was growing religious tolerance. Later colonies, for instance, the king granted a well-known Catholic a charter for land in what is now Maryland, in Mary, named after the Mother Mary. In 1681, King Charles II grants William Penn a charter in what is now Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania later purchased, or William Penn later purchases what is now Delaware, and accepted persecuted Europeans of all religious views. All the colonies recognized that there was a need for government, and also believed that there was a divine God. And so you had to sort of weigh those two things. How do you honor both? So as a result, the beginnings of government began to emerge. Number one, government is the formal vehicle through which policies are made and the affairs of states are conducted. One of the first legislatures, self-rule in the colonies, was the Virginia House of Burgesses, established all the way back in 1619. The first representative assembly in North America. It originally included 22 elected officials. Next was the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This was very different. It wasn't a representative government. Instead, all church members had the right to participate in what were known as town meetings. This direct democracy led to more participation, and it kept religion and cultural values at the center of government. Self-government and the spirit of independence ultimately fostered by it ultimately result in tension with British rule. And that we can probably see where that's going. Section 9.2. So now we're looking at the